Hi, I'm Michelle Sterling for Friends of Science Society. Children are taking to the streets to demand climate action. They're having Friday climate strikes, and they're issuing lawsuits as well. Quebec seems to be very activist on this file, but do the protesters even know what they're protesting about? Sadly, this effort to push children to advocate for climate action, a topic they know nothing about, may end in disaster for society, with indoctrinated youth unable to think critically or scientifically. Do they even know what they're advocating for? For policies like biofuels that are deemed by the UN to constitute crimes against humanity? Do they realize that rapid decarbonization is something that Professor Michael J. Kelly explains would result in mass deaths? Renaud Duberger recently posted an item on his blog called La Marche pour le Climat. He was commenting on a Montreal March for the Climate. If people are walking for something they call the climate, could there be people who are against this climate? And who would be against sunrises too, or sunsets? Duberger says, I am a scientist, and if I were in this walk, I would have questions of a scientific nature to ask these demonstrators who claim to want to protect something which I'm not sure they know and understand. And to protect this climate, against what? Or against whom? Duberger explains the Earth has no climate, so we cannot talk about the climate of the planet. Climate is a regional and not a global concept. We can give a simple definition by saying, like my colleague, geophysicist Vincent Cotello, that climate is the average over 30 years of the weather in a region. And this weather is not only the temperature, but also the degree of humidity, the wind, the precipitation, the normal or extreme weather events, as we often are scared by the alarmists. You would probably be surprised at the responses to my vox pop to these protesters if I asked them the following questions. And here are Duberger's questions. You manifest for the climate. What is climate? Do you pretend that the climate is threatened? And if so, by what or by whom and how? What are the scientific observations on which you base your fears? And how do you explain the fact that the global average annual temperature has been stagnating or barely increasing over the last at least 20 years, despite the fact that more than 40% of all our CO2 emissions have been emitted during the same 20 years? And what do you call the greenhouse effect? What do you think is the most important greenhouse gas? And does climate sensitivity mean anything to you? Duberger says he could stretch this out quite a bit and confuse the majority of these protesters who have a great emotional burden for the environment, and they think that their planet is in danger. But they're unable to state any scientific argument on which they could base their fears, apart from that of the pseudo-consensus that one has drummed into them every day by the media. It's very sad, he says. How can people go out into the streets to demonstrate on an essentially scientific subject of which they know almost nothing, and which they claim that their survival and that of their planet depends on? Renaud was kind enough to also share his questions that he used in his past university classes to get his students thinking. You can see them on our blog in English or on his blog in French. It's clear that climate discussions and science have been distorted by activists. Like Renaud Duberger, we invite our fellow citizens to exercise rigor of thought, since it's a scientific issue that we're talking about. Do not hesitate to put these scientists, the media, politicians, and activist groups in the position of proving their claims. For Friends of Science Society, I'm Michelle Sterling.